The door was already open a crack when I arrived. I could hear voices, laughter, the kind of worn Christmas Eve noise that's supposed to feel like coming home. I'd been stuck on the 401 for 40 minutes behind a transport truck that had jackknifed somewhere near Milton. And by the time I pulled into my daughter's driveway, the windows of her house were glowing gold against the snow. I was late. Not terribly late. Maybe 25 minutes. I stepped onto the porch and reached for the door handle, and that's when I heard him. Honestly? My son-in-law's voice carried clear as a bell through that gap. Christmas is better without the old man here. I said it. Someone had to. There was a beat of silence, then a few nervous laughs. Someone said his name quietly, like a warning. What? He's not here. That's my point. We can actually relax. I stood on that porch for a long moment. The cold was working through my coat. My hand was still on the door handle. I could feel my own heartbeat. Then I let go, turned around, and walked back to my car. I should tell you a few things about myself before I go further, because they matter to what happened next. My name is Frank. I'm 63 years old. I spent 31 years with the Canada Revenue Agency, the last 12 as a senior auditor in the Ontario Regional Office. I reviewed corporate tax filings, traced asset movements, flagged discrepancies that other people missed. I am not a dramatic man. I don't raise my voice. I don't make speeches. I sat across from some very polished, very expensive lawyers in my career, and I watched them sweat, not because I threatened them, but because I was patient, and I was thorough, and I never needed to be anything else. I retired 2 years ago. My wife, Sandra, passed away 4 years before that. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed in the fall, gone by spring. After she died, I sold the house in Mississauga and bought a smaller place in Guelph, closer to my daughter. My daughter's name is Abby. She's 34. She works in marketing for a software company downtown. She has her mother's eyes and her mother's laugh, and, unfortunately, her mother's tendency to see the best in people long past the point where the evidence has stopped supporting it. She married Kyle 18 months ago. Kyle is 37. He grew up in Barrie, went to Ryerson for 2 years before dropping out, and has spent the decade since then bouncing between sales roles and what he calls ventures. He sells himself as an entrepreneur. The word he uses most often is pivot. Every 6 months, he's pivoting. I try to like him. I want to be clear about that. I drove to Abby's apartment for dinner the first time she brought him home, and I brought a decent bottle of Niagara Peninsula Cabernet, and I asked him questions, and I listened. He talked for most of 3 hours about himself. He had a way of speaking that sounded like confidence, but was, on closer inspection, just volume. But Abby loved him, and she was happy, or she seemed happy, so I kept my mouth shut, and I smiled at the wedding, and I danced with my daughter to the song she and her mother used to sing together in the kitchen, and I cried a little because Sandra should have been there, and Carl stood near the bar and talked to his friends about a crypto opportunity he was excited about. I noticed things. I filed them away. That's what I do. The Porsche in the driveway that appeared 8 months after the wedding, the ski chalet weekend in Tremblant that Abby mentioned casually on the phone, the way you mention things you half know you shouldn't be spending money on, the new kitchen renovation, quartz countertops, high-end appliances, the kind of project that runs $80,000–$90,000 easy in the GTA market. Kyle's LinkedIn said he was the founder and CEO of something called Crestline Solutions. I looked it up, a numbered Ontario corporation, registered 18 months prior, no employees listed, no client roster, no address beyond a postal box in Etobicoke. I didn't say anything to Abby, not yet. What I did was watch. About 6 weeks before that Christmas Eve, Abby called me on a Sunday afternoon. I was in my workshop, sanding down a cabinet I was refinishing, and I almost didn't answer because I had sawdust on my hands and the phone was on the bench across the room. I answered, "Dad." Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she wants something, and she knows it's a big ask. She'd last used that voice in university when she needed me to co-sign a student line of credit. Kyle has this opportunity, a really solid one. I put down the sanding block. She explained it carefully, the way she'd obviously rehearsed. A private real estate investment fund, minimum buy-in of $50,000, expected return of 12 to 15% annually, paid out quarterly. The fund was run by a colleague of Kyle's, someone named, and she said this like it was a credential. Warren. Just Warren, I asked. Warren Delacroix. He's been doing this for years, Dad. Kyle's known him since Ryerson. I asked her to send me the prospectus. What arrived in my email 3 days later was 4 pages of very attractive formatting and almost no substance. There was no registration number. There was no registration number. There was no fund manager disclosure. There was no audited financial statement. There were testimonials, which is the financial equivalent of a red flashing light. I called Abby back and told her I wasn't interested. She went quiet in a way that told me the conversation was really about more than my money. Kyle was hoping you'd consider it, she said carefully. He's already in for 20. He was going to use your contribution to hit a threshold that unlocks a better rate for both of you. I said I appreciated that, but no. Dad, he's trying. He's really trying to build something. I said I knew he was, and I said goodnight. I didn't sleep well after that call. Not because I was angry. Because I started doing the math. If Kyle was already in for $20,000, which I doubted because I didn't think Kyle had $20,000, then either he'd borrowed it or Abby had provided it, or the $20,000 was fiction designed to create social pressure on me. Any of those 3 answers was a problem. But the 4th possibility was the one that kept me awake. What if Abby's name was on a mortgage, or a line of credit I didn't know about, and Kyle had been using it? So there I was on Christmas Eve, sitting in my car in my daughter's driveway, and instead of feeling hurt, I felt something settle in me like a thermostat kicking off. I knew what I needed to do. Not that night. That night, I drove to a gas station on Trafalgar, bought a bad coffee, and called Abby from the parking lot. Dad, where are you? She sounded genuinely worried. Kyle said he thought he saw your car out front. I got turned around, I said. Highway was a mess. Listen, sweetheart, I'm not going to make it tonight. Tell everyone I'm sorry. A pause. Are you sure? We have so much food, I'm tired, Abby. I'll see you Boxing Day. Give my love to everyone. I hung up. I finished the bad coffee. I drove home to Guelph. The thing about spending 3 decades with the CRA is that you know people. Retired colleagues, active ones, lawyers who move to private practice, accountants who owe you the occasional professional courtesy when you need to find out whether a numbered corporation is a real business or a shell with a postal box and ambition. You know who to call. I spent the 2 weeks between Christmas and New Year's making quiet phone calls. What I found was not surprising. It was just sad. Crestline Solutions had no revenue. It had, however, a business line of credit from a major Canadian bank, $50,000, secured against Abby's signature as co-applicant. That credit line had been drawn down in full 9 months earlier, according to what I could piece together from conversations with 2 former colleagues who still had eyes on certain registries. The money had moved into an account that showed a pattern consistent with what happens when someone is trying to look liquid without actually being liquid. Transfers in, transfers out. A rhythm that looks like business activity until you track where the money goes, and then it looks like something else. Warren Delacroix, I learned from a contact in Ontario Securities, had 2 previous complaints filed against him with FSRA. Neither had proceeded to formal action, but the complaints existed, and they were consistent with what I was looking at now. Kyle had used my daughter's credit to fund what was, at minimum, a very bad investment, and at maximum, something that would eventually require a conversation with law enforcement. I was not going to call the police. Not yet. Not until Abby understood what was happening. Because if I called the police first, she would defend him. I knew my daughter. She would stand in that driveway and tell the officers there was a misunderstanding, and she would believe it even as she said it. I needed her to see it herself. The chance came in the 2nd week of January. Abby called me on a Tuesday evening. Her voice was tight in a way that had nothing to do with rehearsal. Kyle's been distant, she said. For weeks. Something's wrong, Dad. He won't talk to me. I let her talk. She described the last month, the silences, the late nights, Kyle on his phone in the garage, a conversation she'd accidentally half heard where he was clearly arguing with someone about money. When she finished, I asked her one question. Abby, do you know what's on your credit report right now? Silence. Your personal credit report, I said. Have you checked it recently? No. Why would I? She stopped, Dad, what do you know? I think you should pull it tonight. I can walk you through it on the phone if you want. She pulled it while we were on the call. I heard her breathing change when she found the crest line of credit. I didn't sign this, she said. Her voice had gone very flat. Dad, I never signed this. I know. The silence lasted a long time. How much? She finally asked. 50,000. Drew 2,000. A rundown in full. I heard her set the phone down. I waited. I could hear her moving around her kitchen, that specific sound of someone who needs to be in motion, because stillness is too much to hold right now. She picked the phone back up. Is it gone? The money? I believe so, yes. All of it. All of it. All of it. Another long silence. Then, very quietly, the Warren thing. Yes. Kyle said it was a sure thing. I didn't say anything to that. She didn't need me to. What followed over the next 3 weeks was not a dramatic confrontation. There was no screaming, no throwing of objects, no speech delivered in the rain. I know those are the scenes people imagine, but that's not how it went in that house in Oakville. What happened was Abby asked Kyle to sit down, and she put the credit report on the table between them, and she asked him to explain it. He tried several approaches in sequence. He said she must have signed something without reading it carefully. He said the fund was going to pay out and the money wasn't gone, just invested. He said she was overreacting, that this was how business worked, that her father had poisoned her against him with his CRA mentality and his small-town fearfulness. Abby is her mother's daughter in more ways than her eyes and her laugh. She's also steady in the way. Sandra was steady, not cold, but built on a foundation that doesn't shift. She told him she wanted a full accounting of everywhere the money had gone. She told him she was calling a lawyer in the morning, and she told him without raising her voice that she was going to need him to find somewhere else to stay while they figured out what the path forward looked like. He left that night. He went to his brother's place in Barrie. He's been there since. The lawyer Abby found specializes in financial fraud in family contexts. She's very good. She found 2 additional lines of credit, one of them against a joint savings account that Abby hadn't known was being used as collateral. The total exposure was just under $90,000. Warren Delacroix's fund, as it turned out, had already attracted the attention of FSSRA by the time our lawyer began making inquiries. 3 other investors had filed complaints in December. The investigation is ongoing. I can't say more than that. I had dinner with Abby at her place last month. She made the lamb stew her mother used to make, the one with the root vegetables and the Guinness, and we sat at her kitchen table in the same chairs we always sit in, and for a while we just ate. I should have listened when you said no to the investment, she said eventually. You were trying to support your husband. That's not a character flaw. I knew something was off. She looked at her bowl. I knew for months. I just kept explaining it away. That's what love does sometimes. She looked up at me. How did you know? When did you actually know? I thought about it. I didn't know. I suspected. There's a difference. I've spent a lot of years being careful about that difference. She nodded slowly. The Christmas Eve thing, she said. You heard him, didn't you? You didn't get turned around. I looked at her. I figured it out later, she said quietly. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm sorry you heard that. It doesn't matter. It does. I shook my head. What it did was give me a clear head. Sometimes clarity comes from unexpected places. She reached across the table and put her hand over mine, the way her mother used to do when she wanted me to understand something without words. We ate the rest of the stew. We talked about other things. Outside, it was the kind of February evening that feels like winter is losing its grip, just slightly. Not warm yet, but the darkness comes a few minutes later than it did a week ago. And you notice. I drove home along the 401 and thought about Sandra, the way I always do on that stretch of highway between Oakville and Guelph. I thought about how she would have handled all of this. The patience of it. The waiting. The long game. She was always better at the long game than I was. She would have known from the first dinner. Abby is going to be fine. The legal process will take time, and some of the money may not be recoverable, and the coming months will be hard in ways that are hard to prepare for. But she's her mother's daughter. She'll get through it the same way Sandra got through everything. One day, one decision, one small, clear-eyed step at a time. As for Kyle, I don't spend much time thinking about him. Men like Kyle have a way of landing somewhere soft and starting the whole thing over again. That's not my problem to solve. My problem was my daughter, and she's going to be fine. That's enough. I still think about that moment on the porch sometimes. The cold at my back, the gold light in the windows, Kyle's voice carrying through the gap in the door, like he owned every room in every house he'd ever walked into, and me standing there with my hand on the handle, making the quietest decision of my life. People ask, when they hear a story like this, why I didn't go in, why I didn't say something, why I didn't confront him right there in front of the family, with the Christmas tree lit up in the background and everyone holding their glasses. I understand the impulse. There's something satisfying about the idea of walking in at exactly that moment and watching the color drain from someone's face. But I've learned, over 63 years of living, and 31 of them spent in rooms where people were being held accountable for their choices, that the loudest response is almost never the most effective one. Kyle wanted a reaction. Men like Kyle run on reactions. They need the drama to redirect attention, to reframe themselves as the wronged party, to pull Abby into a corner and say your father embarrassed us in front of everyone. If I'd walked through that door, he would have used it. I knew that without having to think it through. Some things you just know. What I did instead was wait and watch and follow the numbers where they led. That's not patience in the passive sense. It's not just sitting still and hoping things sort themselves out. It's something more deliberate than that, a decision to let the truth do the work that anger would only get in the way of. Every action has a consequence that follows from it. As surely as winter follows fall, Kyle borrowed against my daughter's name and spent the money and told himself he could manage the outcome. He couldn't. Not because I stopped him, but because that's what happens when you build something on a foundation that isn't yours. Eventually, the structure tells on itself. The hardest part wasn't the investigation, or the phone calls, or even the conversation where I had to tell Abby that the number was close to $90,000. The hardest part was those weeks before Christmas, knowing what I suspected and choosing not to speak until I had something real to say. That kind of restraint costs something. I won't pretend it doesn't, but here's what I came back to. Every time I was tempted to move faster than the facts supported, I had a responsibility to get it right, not to be right. There's a difference. Being right is about me. Getting it right was about Abby. She deserved the truth delivered carefully, with evidence, in a way she could actually hold on to. Not a father's hunch delivered in anger at a Christmas dinner. That would have pushed her toward him, not away. Abby is going to rebuild. She's already doing it. She called me last week to say she'd started meeting with a financial advisor, her own, independent, nobody Kyle had ever spoken to. And her voice had that quality it used to have when she was a kid, working through a hard problem, focused, a little tired, but pointed in the right direction. That's all any of us can do, really. Not avoid the hard things, but face them clearly, with whatever understanding we've managed to earn, and keep moving. Sandra would have said the same thing, probably in fewer words. She was always better at the short version.